I got back from my 2-week-long vacation excited because in the time that I was away, Six Underground released on Netflix. This is of course the new Michael Bay film featuring Ryan Reynolds and nobody else of note. The trailer indicated that the plot would follow a diverse team of individuals who faked their own deaths in order to live as ghosts and truly make a difference in the world. They sought to enact their version of justice on those who believed themselves above the law. With a premise as quote-unquote interesting as this and a director of the caliber of Michael Bay, I was sold from the moment I laid eyes on this project. So when I got back from vacation, I camped out at Vivi's place and we watched Six Underground together. Or at least, we tried to. I mean, we did sit in front of a screen and watch things happen for 2 hours, but neither of us could actually tell what was happening most of the time. And when we could discern what was happening and the purpose of that thing in the plot, it was clunky, goofy, or gratuitous. And in that regard, this movie is exactly what we've come to expect and cherish from Michael Bay. But whereas Transformers uses Bayhem to its benefit, Six Underground is just a mess. The plot is paper thin, the characters are two-dimensional, and the visuals are constantly jarring. Watching this movie is an experience that falls somewhere between overwhelming and obnoxious, and a straight-up fever dream. Action is my favorite genre, and I would go to some length to defend the Transformers movies, but I could not recommend that anyone watch Six Underground unless they have motion sickness pills handy. Beyond the visuals, there's not much else that can't also be justifiably chastised about this schlock fest. But before I get to the review, I have to advise that you just not watch this movie. Six Underground is on Netflix, so as long as you have a subscription, it isn't a waste of money to see it, but it is most certainly a waste of time. And without further ado, here's why. We open to expository narration, and immediately one of my biggest criticisms of the movie is personified. The movie's timeline is laughably unclear. During this intro, Ryan tells us that the day he died was 3 years ago, and that his team's first mission was 4 months ago in Italy. This information is accompanied by a massive title card indicating that what's happening on screen takes place in the past. And within the first 5 minutes of the movie, after just having established that we're in the past, there comes another title card that reads 17 minutes earlier. At this point, I was thinking that erratically jumping around the timeline would be a running gag throughout the movie, like intentionally disordering the movie as a stylistic choice. But no, this is the only time in the film when the jumping happens so rapidly with title cards, meaning that this is the most sensible timeline hopping in the movie. And in the next 5 minutes, my next biggest criticism of the movie is put on display. The soundtrack. I'm genuinely unsure if Six Underground has a score, but if it does, it is totally overshadowed by the generic, dated, and sometimes inappropriate songs used, mostly during action scenes. The editing is so jittery that many shots during said scenes look like they could come straight out of a music video. And I think that was intentional, but even so, it makes Six Underground play out less like a movie and more like an adrenaline-pumping commercial. By the end of the movie, we counted 10 instances of indistinct, hype songs, and 4 of them played during the Italy car chase, which is the first 20 minutes of the movie, one of the songs being a remix of O Fortuna. The Italy chase comes to a close when the team gets to safety, but due to low visibility, the driver drifts himself into a forklift. His death is essentially the starting point of the plot, as Ryan must now find a replacement for him. The whole purpose of this extremely drawn-out chase scene was to establish that the driver dies and that they're targeting 4 generals for something. But you'd be forgiven for not knowing anything about any generals because there's so much fucking clutter on screen at any given moment that your brain isn't given any time to process the scant lines of dialogue explaining why the characters are doing what they're doing. Which brings me to my next criticism, which, like both others, is evident throughout the movie. Pacing. For whatever reason, Michael Bay doesn't take his foot off the gas. Six Underground moves at breakneck speed whether there is cause to or not. The characters could be in a death-defying situation, during which such erratic editing could be justified, or they could be doing something as trivial as having coffee. But I don't want to get ahead of myself on that note. The speed at which information is presented to the audience, visually or otherwise, is quite consistent throughout the film. The problem is that that speed is too damn fast. After the driver's death, we, the audience, do not get a moment to grieve or at least rest because of the camera's perpetual movement. The camera is constantly shaking, zooming, or panning. It appears Bay doesn't understand the concept of subtlety, or in any case doesn't care for it. We are then introduced to the sniper, a grieving ex-soldier who was emotionally manipulated into joining when Ryan told him that he would have let him take the shot that would have saved his friends. Nice how they gloss over that fact. His introduction to the team also serves as our briefing on the team itself. We learn they operate out of a plain graveyard in the Californian desert, that they each have moral reasons for having faked their deaths to do what they're doing, and that their first target is a dictator named Rovak. The plan is simple. kill Rovok's 4 generals, and replace Rovok with his benevolent brother. The plan is just that simple. However, while the plot of the movie does follow that plan exactly, the reasons for most of what takes place on screen is unclear to the audience 99% of the time. This will become more relevant later. For now, let's talk about the cafe scene. It is probably the most relaxed scene in the whole movie, and yet is still extremely busy. The camera cuts are quick, the camera movement is constant, and there are unexplained lens flares all over the place. It's as though Bay is incapable of making a peaceful shot, or at least a prolonged peaceful shot. It's as though he's committed some sort of crime if a calm, unmoving, resting shot goes on for more than 1 second. Bay always has movement in his shots, and even when the movement is minimal, he'll still clutter up the screen with a lens flare or uncomfortable close-up of a character. By the end of our watch through, Vivi and I counted a grand total of 4 still shots in 6 Underground, and from the looks of it, the scene in which those still shots were featured was very likely done by the second unit. It's as though Bay never wants you to rest, like he's trying to forcefully retain your attention by filling the screen with movement or clutter. This stylistic choice of his is on full display in 6 Underground. We are then taken to Turgestan, where Ryan appears to be doing undercover work, possibly to help his team infiltrate the 4 general circles while he poses as an apathetic billionaire. He is on the ground when a gas attack happens and so launches into action to help civilians. Cut to Rovok and his brother discussing this attack, and we get insights into both of their characters and motivations. Cut again to an opera where Ryan seems to be surveilling Rovok. He confronts Rovok at a bar, and we see Ryan's animosity for the dictator grows stronger. Cut again to Ryan having taken the bartender home with him, and through their pillow talk he is motivated to become a ghost. Cut to Ryan saying, "And now you're all caught up," and it turns out everything we just saw happened 3 years ago, before Ryan faked his death and formed the team. While watching this movie, Vivi and I had no idea that that was a flashback until the movie presented a title card that read, "The Present," afterwards. And the only indication we were given that all that happened in the past beforehand was a title card that read, "1." So for once, Michael Bay actually assumes his audience is intelligent enough to put the pieces of the timeline together for themselves, but inadvertently ends up confusing us because of the genuinely difficult to perceive structure of the movie. If the title cards were clearer, then this confusion could have been avoided, and maybe if Ryan looked different 3 years ago to the way he looked now, like maybe clean-shaven or something, then it would have been no problem to discern that we were looking at different time frames. But because of the sporadic, unclear editing and piss-poor direction, the movie doesn't make sense until you pause it and piece it together on a pinboard with red tape and large text labels. And it doesn't get any better from here. We then get 2's backstory, which is just her and the CIA capturing Rovok's brother in order to hand him over to Rovok. What purpose does this serve in the plot? Who knows? How did she go from CIA to the Ghosts? Who cares? Her flashback was a waste of screen time featuring the 5th unnecessary generic dated song. But immediately after her backstory, Ryan narrates even more of his backstory from the present. So it's not a flashback as much as it is exposition now, meaning that even the method of presenting past information to the audience does not stay consistent. Turns out the exposition was literally just to relate Ryan's motivation to the audience. Again, yet another poignant criticism of 6 Underground is here exemplified. Too much tell, not enough show. Narration is frequently used to tell the viewer what's going on and why it's happening, but only to answer the most basic of questions. The more detailed questions, some of which are pivotal to the plot, remain unanswered for the whole movie. We are then taken to Vegas, where 2 and 3 have the task of finding Rovok's brother's location and killing the 4 generals. But because this is a Michael Bay baby, the plot progression needs to be accompanied by scantily clad women, slow-mo, and another generic song. 3's backstory is glossed over, but is as simple as him killing a guy, thus orphaning a small child. As far as character development goes, this is actually significant considering what the rest of the cast gets. 4's backstory is decently fleshed out, but ultimately only establishes that he's a fearless guy. This is paid off in the climax when he says that he's afraid. Not only are 6 Underground's characters paper thin, but so are the setups and payoffs. Approximately halfway through the runtime of the film, Ryan narrates, "The world is wrapped in red tape and I couldn't cut through it even with $1 billion sword. So we left behind everything, everyone, to become no one." This is the type of dramatic narration a director might use to establish a team of ghosts. This is the type of line that would normally appear early in a movie, but that Michael Bay, he's unconventional, he's unique, he's fucking out of touch. It is jarring to hear the main character give expository narration like this halfway through the movie. It's as though they had too much narration recorded and didn't want to waste it, so they just crammed in lines explaining things we already know wherever they could, no matter how uncomfortably it fit. Next up is the Hong Kong mission. The goal is to kidnap Rovok's brother, and the plan is completely completely unknown to the audience, which is my next biggest criticism of Six Underground. Too often during the movie is the plan revealed to the audience as it happens rather than being established and laid out beforehand. I never realized how strong of a storytelling technique it is to explain a plan to the viewer before playing it out. Ocean's 11 does that and even baits and switches the audience, making for even more compelling events. But in this movie, on too many occasions, things just happen and we only find out what purpose they serve afterwards. As I said earlier, the plot is simple and the goals are clear, but the nitty-gritty details are not made available to the audience until we piece them together ourselves. And not in a clever Fight Club or The Prestige way, but in a lazy and disorienting manner. It makes the viewer feel like they aren't part of the experience, but just along for the disjointed ride as an uninformed spectator. Sniper Guy shoots out one of the walls of the overhanging pool, flooding the penthouse and allowing the team to overcome the enemy forces. Important to note that during the flood, 2, 3, and 4 were all on the same level in relatively close proximity to each other. After the flood, 2 and 3 go to the top of the penthouse and zipline Rovok's brother to an adjacent building. This whole process takes about 2 minutes. And after we see that Ryan, 2, 3, and Rovok's brother are safe on the rooftop of the other building, we are shown that 4 has somehow been pinned down with almost no ammo left. There was a massive window in time during which the team moved upstairs to the roof, ziplined between buildings, and had stupid knockout gags on both rooftops. During that time frame, 4 inexplicably stayed put and allowed himself to be cornered to artificially raise the stakes and bait his own death. Don't worry though, he makes it out fine. The saddest part of this is that it appears Michael Bay doesn't understand how to organically raise stakes and is content in thinking that we'll just accept whatever garbage he throws at us at face value. Cut to the final act where Ryan and Sniper Guy are staging a power outage in Turkestan as part of their master plan. While conversing with a head technician at the power plant, I experienced the only authentic laughter I had for the whole movie. It was when the doc mistakenly told Ryan that one of the competing plant's head technicians was dead and Ryan had to recover from it. I found it genuinely hilarious, but I totally understand if nobody else did. Humor is not one of Six Underground's strong suits. Once preparations are in place, Ryan gives half of the team a 50-second long motivational speech. This 50 seconds is some of the only rest we get from the bombastic action, and even then, it still suffers from Bay's patented ADHD-styled visuals. They launch a broadcast hijacking depicting Rovok's brother spurring Turkestani civilians into action, and it takes all of 5 minutes for the whole country to drop what they're doing, dress themselves in rebel attire, materialize protest paraphernalia, and crowd the streets for a revolution, to the tune of another generic and dated song. As for my next biggest criticism of Six Underground, it has to do with continuity. Of all sorts. And conveniently, this movie's climax is a showcase of terrible continuity. There are some shots set in broad daylight, followed by shots set at sundown, followed once more by shots set in daytime, and then suddenly it's nighttime. Throughout the movie, there are instances of choppy editing making you question how a character moved from A to B and such things, but nowhere is continuity more of a failure than in the climax. For the rest of our lives, Vivi and I will never forget the teleporting car crash. After seeing Rovok roadkill civilians, 3 decides to crash his car into Rovok's, flipping his car and not much else. But before the impact, the road is filled with protesters, debris, and generally dimly lit. After the impact, however, the protesters and debris are gone and the environment is very well lit. I'm not sure about it, but Vivi swears the ocean appeared behind the car during the transition as well. Never before have I seen such brazen laziness in a big budget movie. It speaks to the care and respect with which Bay treats his projects and audience in a less than flattering manner. But that's the brunt of it for my take on Michael Bay's latest shit show. Six Underground is a messy, over-budgeted, mindless waste of time. I knew going into it was going to be action schlock, but I was at least hoping for enjoyable action schlock. This movie really seems like Bay experimenting with his audience by seeing how bad of a film he can make, as though his entire career now revolves around intentionally malfunctioning in order to test if people have any kind of standards for art anymore. Ultimately, this movie just left a bad taste in my mouth for how obnoxiously paced and edited it is. The structure is confusing to say the least. On several occasions, I found myself having to pause and fit scenes onto a timeline like a jigsaw puzzle just to comprehend what I was watching. The dialogue consists mostly of clunky one-liners and unnecessary narration. The characters are sadly underdeveloped, especially the Doctor. She is the only character who had no backstory or flashbacks, and I feel that her actress was wasted potential. The music is commonplace pop, techno, and rock that you'd have no problem forgetting moments after hearing it. The songs on this movie's soundtrack range from unsettling to outright ill-suited. They literally had AWOL Nation's Run play over over the parkour guy running away from bad guys. The ratio of information that is presented to the viewer compared to what is explained to the viewer is so off that it only serves to ruin your immersion. But for those of you who'd like nothing more than to have shiny keys jingle in front of your face with no rhyme or reason, then 6 Underground is the shameless product for you. As always, I love discussion and debate, so if you have any criticism of my take on Michael Bay's newest prehensile penis fuel disaster, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, see you next time.